Imagine looking back at the entirety of human history. Like every powering empire we've ever built, every massive philosophical leap we've made.
Right, all of it.
Yeah, every technological marvel from the wheel to the microchip. Now imagine taking a thick red marker and just, giving all of it an absolute zero.
Wow, just like a total failure.
Exactly. Just grading the entire human resume as a complete and total failure.
I mean, it's sort of a staggering premise to start from, isn't it?
Yeah.
We are so conditioned to view history as this upward trajectory of triumph and progress.
Oh, absolutely.
So to just discard it completely, it certainly gets your attention right out of the gate.
It really does. And, well, that is exactly the starting line for the source we are analyzing today. So welcome to another deep dive. We have a massive mission for you right now.
We really do.
We're unpacking a highly provocative, incredibly sweeping philosophical essay by an author named Zhu Feng. It's translated by Kong Long, and it is simply titled The Past of Humanity.
You know, the title sounds almost like a eulogy, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally.
As if the author is looking back at something that has, well, already ended, or at least something that desperately needs to be left behind us.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the baseline this text sets up is absolutely brutal. The source material ruthlessly categorizes the entire past of humanity as nothing more than a history of suffering,
Right.
a history of deep-seated selfishness, and a history governed entirely by the survival of the fittest. The author literally calls it a history of wickedness that is like entirely unworthy of emulation. He's essentially saying our foundation is completely rotten.
What's fascinating here is how the author defines our current transitional state, despite that completely rotten foundation.
Right.
The text actually acknowledges that we are right now moving away from that barbaric past. We are tentatively stepping toward rationality.
And he credits science for that, right?
Yes, entirely. The author gives the credit for this shift entirely to scientific development. Science has forced us to look at empirical truth and helped us realize the root causes of our social turbulence.
But there's a catch.
A huge catch. This is the core friction of the entire essay. The author argues that there is a massive, heavy anchor still dragging behind us, and it's threatening to pull us right back into the Dark Ages.
And that anchor is what the author terms superstition.
Exactly.
And just a quick note before we tear into exactly what this author thinks superstition is. The author takes some massive, incredibly polarizing swings in this text.
Oh, definitely. Huge swings.
Yeah, especially regarding global politics, nationalism, and specific, highly sensitive religious frameworks. So we just want to be clear with you listening. While our job today isn't to agree or disagree with those swings, unpacking the architecture of this worldview is a totally fascinating exercise.
Right, we aren't endorsing the viewpoints.
Exactly. We are simply here to act as your guides through this really unique landscape and just map out the underlying logic the author is using.
Precisely. Because to understand how the author believes we can move forward, we have to meticulously dismantle what he thinks is holding us back. Which brings us to how this essay completely redefines the word superstition. When you hear that word, your brain probably immediately jumps to, folklore.
Yeah, like black cats walking under ladders, throwing salt over your shoulder.
Yeah, those irrational little habits. But the author goes so much deeper than that. The text strips the word of its spooky connotations, basically.
Uh-huh.
It redefines superstition not as folklore, but as fanatical belief in absolutely anything. It is the blindness that comes from absolute, unquestioning certainty.
The fanaticism is the key.
Exactly. The mechanism here is what matters. The author is targeting the emotional rigidity of the human mind. The text argues that when you lock onto a belief so tightly that you refuse to entertain new information, you are fundamentally abandoning rationality.
You're just reacting on emotion.
Yes, you're reverting to a primitive emotional state.
And the text points this weapon right at three major areas of human society out of the gate. First up is fanatical religion.
Right.
The author claims that believing your specific religion is the only right one is fundamentally an emotional choice, not a rational one.
Because it shuts down inquiry.
Exactly. By claiming absolute supremacy of one doctrine, the author argues you are actively suppressing human nature because you are killing empathy and curiosity. The text claims this rigid, fanatical state makes war completely unavoidable.
Because if you possess the absolute, unquestionable truth, then anyone who disagrees with you isn't just wrong.
They're a threat.
They are an existential threat to the universe. You can see how that emotional rigidity guarantees conflict.
Yeah, it's a terrifying loop.
It really is. The author explicitly states that as long as this type of fanaticism exists, the true light of human nature cannot shine. It's like trapped under the weight of dogma.
Wow.
But then, and this is wild, the essay pivots and takes that exact same logic and applies it to an area that usually prides itself on being the opposite of religion.
The academic and scientific communities.
Yeah.
Yes. The second major superstition is following theories blindly. The essay argues that the development of all things, including human thought and, scientific discovery, progresses in the form of a wave.
We really need to dig into this wave metaphor because it is crucial to understanding the author's worldview.
I love this part.
It's so good. Think about a wave moving across the ocean. It gathers momentum, it reaches a peak, it crashes, and then it recedes to gather momentum again.
It's always moving.
Right. It is intensely dynamic. So the text argues that any academic conclusion, any grand theory we have right now, is just a photograph of a wave at one specific microsecond in time.
It's just a snapshot.
Exactly. It represents where development was at that exact moment, but it is not the ultimate finalized truth. It is a symbol of progress, not the end of progress.
Which means if we follow a theory blindly, if we lock it into textbooks as an absolute unquestionable law, our intellectual growth is immediately paralyzed.
Right. It stops the wave.
Yeah. The text has this fantastic quote. It says, if we are bound by absolute theories, we will never see a situation where 100 of flowers blossom, 100 of schools of thought contend.
It's a beautiful image of intellectual diversity, but I can see you turning that over in your head.
Wait, hold on. Because if we apply that strictly, if every theory is just a temporary wave, how does society actually function?
Well,
Doesn't there have to be some agreed-upon theoretical baseline? If everyone is constantly questioning the fundamental physics of how steel bends, you can never build a bridge. We need a baseline to prevent total societal paralysis.
it's a great point. It's the natural logical friction of the text's argument. If everything is endlessly fluid, you just can't construct anything solid.
Exactly.
But if we look closer at the author's underlying mechanism, the warning is much less about the practical day-to-day application of established math and much more about the psychological trap of intellectual comfort.
Oh, I see. So it's the fanaticism of the belief rather than the belief itself.
Precisely. Think about your own industry. Your own professional life or your academic circles right now. How often do you see people clinging to an established best practice purely because it feels safe?
All the time.
Right, because it's how things have always been done. The author is arguing that when safety solidifies into dogma, it twists our capacity for innovation. Building the bridge using current physics isn't the superstition.
Right.
The superstition is excommunicating the young engineer who suggests a totally radical, unproven new way to calculate the load.
That distinction makes perfect sense. It's about not closing the door on the next wave.
Exactly.
And that mechanism of rigid, unquestioning loyalty transitions us perfectly from intellectual dogma right into tribal dogma. Because the author takes this exact same framework of blind fanaticism and applies it to how we view our own borders and our own leaders.
Yeah, we are getting into nationalism and the cult of personality now.
The pitfalls of collective pride. And man, the text pulls no punches here. It argues that national pride, specifically that bloated sense of absolute superiority over other nations, is actually evil.
Not just misguided, but actively destructive.
Yes, because it is the ultimate barrier builder. Nationalism, according to the author's logic, is just another superstition. It's an emotional refusal to see the value in anything outside your own arbitrary geographic lines.
The author is basically diagnosing human history with a chronic societal superiority complex.
Yes.
And to illustrate why this is so damaging, the text uses a very grounded, almost agrarian analogy.
The fruit analogy. I was so hoping we'd get to this. I love this part.
It's very vivid.
It is. So the author says that different nations are like different fruits and melons. They all have their own unique advantages, their own specific taste, their own texture, their own degree of sweetness.
Right.
But the text asks a hypothetical question. What happens if a watermelon and a peach each decide fanatically that they are the absolute best fruit in existence and all other fruits are entirely useless?
The author calls the result of that mindset a monomode.
A monomode.
Yeah, and it is an extremely overbearing, suffocating way for a society to behave.
And if we really stretch this analogy out, the mechanism of why monomode is so dangerous becomes incredibly clear. Think about an intellectual fruit salad.
Okay, I'm tracking.
If a nation is entirely comprised of aggressive, chest-thumping watermelons, you only ever get one single flavor of problem solving. It's an intellectual monoculture. And what happens in biology when you have a monoculture?
A single specific blight or like a single drought can wipe out the entire crop.
Exactly. If a challenge arises that a watermelon can't solve, the whole bowl is empty. You desperately need the intellectual biodiversity of the peach, the grapes, the berries to survive a complex, changing world.
Right.
By violently declaring yourself the only valid fruit, you're basically ensuring your own eventual extinction.
That is a fantastic expansion of the logic. When a nation operates in mono mode, it purposefully starves itself of the richness of the collective human orchard.
I love the human orchard.
But what's fascinating is how the author zooms in from the nation as a whole down to the individuals we choose to lead those nations. Nationalism breeds an intense need for a singular savior. The essay takes a very hard look at the cult of personality.
The worship of what the text calls the great and the masters.
Yes.
Now, the author isn't saying we shouldn't admire people. The text actually acknowledges that founding heroes who managed to eliminate old, corrupt forces made real achievements. They are worthy of respect.
Sure.
And master thinkers who possess foresighted wisdom should absolutely be respected. But the author draws a massive, impenetrable wall between respect and worship.
Because worship requires surrendering your own critical thinking, and this is where the author introduces one of the most vivid metaphors in the entire essay to explain the mechanics of why worship destroys a society.
This part is so poetic.
It really is. It's the sun effect. The text points out that we only get to see the vast magnificence of the universe because the night sky is filled with thousands of different twinkling stars.
Right.
In human terms, a nation is truly great when brilliant talents emerge in succession, one after another from all different directions.
But if you take one of those talented thinkers or one of those charismatic leaders and you elevate them, if you treat them not as a star but as the sun,
You drown out everything else. If the entire society is forced to orbit completely around the blinding glare of one singular individual, the brilliancy of every other talent is completely covered up. You literally cannot see the stars when the sun is out.
wow.
And as a direct result, the text argues, the nation will have no successors. When the sun eventually sets, you are left with nothing but absolute darkness.
Wow. And if we connect this to the bigger picture,
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains why the author classifies this extreme level of hero worship as a literal mania.
he doesn't hold back.
The text doesn't mince words at all. It explicitly calls it a mental illness and a dangerous regression into barbaric ignorance.
A mental illness, that is intense.
Very, because when you treat a human leader as an infallible god, you inevitably drag humanity right back into that vicious historical cycle of suffering we talked about at the top of the show. You are violently repressing the natural emergence of new, diverse ideas.
It is genuinely incredible how systematically this essay is bulldozing the structures we normally rely on.
Yeah, it takes down everything.
We've knocked down the rigidity of religion, the absolute permanence of scientific theories, the pride of nationalism, and the blindness of hero worship.
It's a clean sweep.
It really is. But having dismantled those societal structures, the deep dive now takes a sharp turn into the author's views on our actual biological limits.
Yeah.
We are moving from the philosophical into the deeply metaphysical here.
We are. This is the section where the text shifts gears and outlines a very specific framework regarding what humans are biologically capable of and where we absolutely should not tread.
Right.
The essay argues that a major, highly destructive superstition in the modern world is the blind pursuit of the extraordinary.
The author lays down a hard biological boundary. We are bound by our human DNA. We are men because we have human bodies encoded with human DNA. We are not and cannot become gods.
It's a very firm limit.
And to drive this point home, the author throws in another wonderfully grounded, almost humorous analogy. The text reads, if a potato wants to become a tomato, a red date wants to become a walnut, it is not only unnecessary, but also impossible.
It sounds like a joke, but the underlying philosophical mandate is incredibly strict. The author is instructing the general public to submit to natural law. Stop trying to hack your biology to become something you are not.
Right.
Now, the text does make a very curious concession here. It notes that we cannot logically deny the possibility that beings from other dimensions or other times could theoretically be reincarnated here on Earth.
Wait, like aliens or spirits?
Essentially, yeah.
Oh,
Endowed by the greatest creator with special abilities already baked into their specific DNA. But for the vast, vast majority of us regular potatoes.
Those regular potatoes, yeah.
Seeking out supernatural power is what the text calls getting on the way of the devil.
And the text gets highly specific about what that way of the devil looks like in our current era. The author explicitly calls out the explosive popularity of Gong exercises over the last 2 decades.
Which is very specific.
Yeah, for those who might not be familiar, Gong exercises like Qigong often involve breathwork, meditation, and energy manipulation. And in some contexts, they promise to unlock supernatural health, extraordinary physical abilities, or deep mystical powers. The author utterly rejects this.
The author labels these practices as a massive superstition that has completely drained the time, the energy, and the brilliant talent of countless wise individuals.
But why is it so dangerous in the author's eyes? I mean, if someone wants to breathe deeply in a park, why does the text care?
Because of the psychological mechanism behind it. The critique is that these supernatural pursuits lead an individual into a swamp of self-anesthetizing and self-deceiving. By constantly trying to force your potato DNA to manifest tomato qualities, you are living in a delusion. You are ignoring reality. You lose your rational footing because you are obsessed with escaping your human nature instead of perfecting it.
Which brings us to how the author handles gods and ghosts. And you really have to remember our impartiality disclaimer from earlier because the text draws some incredibly rigid, highly specific theological lines here.
Very rigid.
The author claims, as an absolute, unquestionable fact of human existence, that there are only 2 gods, Jesus and Satan.
It is a striking assertion, especially in an essay that spends so much time demanding scientific rationality and warning against absolute theories.
Yeah, feels almost contradictory at first glance.
The text states that these 2 figures are the only legitimate structural bookends of the spiritual universe. Therefore, any other gods that humanity has worshipped throughout history are entirely man-made clutter.
Just clutter.
The essay argues that humans are simply not eligible to arbitrarily assign the title of God to anyone or anything else, and doing so is the ultimate form of superstition.
And when the text moves from gods to ghosts, the author takes a surprisingly practical, almost dismissive approach.
Yeah, it's very pragmatic.
The logic basically goes, if we show absolutely no interest in them, they won't bother us. There's no need to perform rituals or hire experts or ask a god to drive ghosts away.
Just ignore them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, the author argues that modern society's obsession with advertising ghosts, whether that's in movies, books, or just cultural conversation, is a massive historical retrogression. To the author, focusing on ghosts is an act completely incompatible with a modern, civilized, rational society.
It is a highly nuanced, almost contradictory worldview. The author fully acknowledges that the supernatural exists, gods exist, ghosts exist, the spirit world exists, but simultaneously demands that humanity completely ignore almost all of it in favor of grounded rationality.
Right.
The text insists that everyday humans attempting to communicate with the spirit world is actively destructive to human development.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because inside that demand to ignore the supernatural, there is a massive, glaring paradox in the text that I just cannot stop turning over in my mind.
Oh.
The author explicitly states that the spirit world does exist and that it is technically possible to interact with it. However, the text warns that the only type of person who can authentically and safely communicate with the spirit world is someone who possesses a perfect human nature.
Right.
If you don't have perfect human nature, the communication goes wildly astray and deceives you.
That is the knot at the center of the entire essay, isn't it?
Yes. How do we possibly reconcile this? Think about how the author opened this entire document. The very first claim was that the entirety of human history is a history of selfishness, animal instincts, and absolute wickedness. It's a 0.
Right, a complete failure.
So if our entire foundation is rooted in barbarism, where exactly is this perfect human nature supposed to come from? How can any human being possess a perfect human nature if our history has never ever produced one?
It is the ultimate tension of the author's philosophy. To reconcile it, we have to look at how the author views human potential. The text seems to suggest that perfect human nature is a dormant state.
Like it's asleep.
Exactly. It's a seed that exists within us, but it has been buried under thousands of years of the exact superstitions we've been unpacking today.
Oh, okay.
The fanaticism of religion, the arrogance of nationalism, the delusion of absolute theories, the mania of hero worship, all of these are layers of heavy, toxic soil. The argument is that only by systematically stripping away all of these man-made obsessions can that original perfect nature finally crack the surface and emerge.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you navigate your day today?
Good question.
If we step back and look at the grand, sweeping timeline the author has laid out for us, the architecture looks something like this. The past was an era ruled entirely by darkness, driven by animal instincts and smothered by superstition. The present, the chaotic era you and I are trying to navigate right now, is an awkward, messy, transitional phase where the empirical truths of science are constantly colliding with lingering religious dogmas and those stubborn old superstitions.
And the future, according to Xufeng's vision, will finally be an era of genuine hope. A time where the rigorous truths of science and the profound depths of religion finally mix together harmoniously, specifically guided by what the author calls the light of ration.
This raises an important question for all of us, doesn't it? Because we are the ones living in that messy present.
It absolutely does, because whether or not you agree with the author's highly specific theological boundaries regarding Jesus and Satan, or their political views on the evils of nationalism, or the complete dismissal of gong exercises, the core intellectual exercise of this essay is incredibly vital.
We have to do the work.
We do. The author's demanding that we aggressively audit our own blind spots. In a world defined by absolute information overload, what are the superstitions you are clinging to? What are the established academic theories, the comfortable national prides, or the modern charismatic masters that you have simply stopped questioning?
Are you orbiting so closely around a sun that you've blinded yourself to the rest of the stars? Are you a watermelon demanding that the peaches cease to exist?
Exactly. The intellectual hygiene required to pause and ask yourself, am I believing this rationally because the evidence supports it, or am I believing this fanatically because it feels safe? That is a tool we all desperately need to cultivate.
And that leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends. The author promises that once we successfully strip away all these superstitions, the fanaticism, the hero worship, the dogmatic theories, the true light of human nature will finally be free to shine. But if you think back to the very beginning of our conversation, if our entire historical baseline is truly defined by nothing but survival of the fittest in animal instincts, is the light of human nature really something we are trying to uncover from our past? Or, if the past is a zero, is that light something we have to entirely invent for our future?
That might just be the ultimate diagnostic question of our era. Are we excavating our humanity, or are we engineering it?
It really is the question that changes everything. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Keep auditing your beliefs, keep looking for the twinkling stars instead of just the sun, and keep aggressively questioning the truths you've always taken for granted. We'll catch you next time.